This talk was given by Roshi Rafe Martin, guiding teacher of the Endless Path Zendo, a lay Buddhist community in Rochester, New York. Join our practice, in person or online, at endlesspathzendo.org.
So today is April 12th, 2025. Today we'll celebrate and honor the Buddha's birth, the foundation, in fact, an expression of his bodhisattva vow and commitment to the realization of original mind and original enlightenment. I'm just going to turn the laptop around for 1 minute so you can see what I'm looking at here. You'll see the baby Buddha on a lotus and a little altar celebrating the Buddha's birth. We'll talk about this in today's Teisho, but just give you an eyeful so you see what we're looking at. And later in the ceremony, we'll all be facing that. The laptop will remain turned around. So for this morning, with a few edits, I'm going to read from a couple, maybe a year or so ago, 2 years maybe, a book of mine, The Zen Life of Buddha, and with some edits as we go along. Times have changed in many ways since this book emerged. Well, we all know what we're talking about. So, in any case, the Buddha's birth is not, its celebration is not really a children's event, though in many cases and places children are certainly invited. It's quite a festive atmosphere. But it's a day of deep respect for the aspiration, the courage, the dedication, and scrupulous honesty and compassion and commitment of the Buddha's practice. His birth was part of his practice coming into life. And now this seems to me more central than ever, when so many seem to be willing to be born as less than Buddhas. Adults willing to be born as less than Buddhas, less than their potential. In this time of rampant greed, anger, ignorance of our own nature, and all the traumas that spring from self-centered behaviors, we have a chance to do our best to realize the path of the Buddha and awake as ordinary Buddhas, which means ourselves. This is not simply a myth. It's what each of us can aspire to do, is the point. So, we'll start with the legend of the Buddha's birth. The essence of it is conveyed by Buddhist tradition. In the city of Kapilavastu in southern Nepal, Queen Maya, wife of King Suddhodana, had a marvelous dream. In her dream, a six-tusked white elephant touched her right side with a lotus flower. She awoke in joy. She told the king. He went to his counselors. They said the dream meant that a child would soon be born to them. Further, it would be a remarkable child. And if this child could be kept from knowing the painful facts of impermanence, he would, in this unimpeded way, with the great virtue and merit he'd already accumulated in past lives, rise to the position of world ruler, emperor of the world. However, if he grasped the reality of impermanence, he would renounce worldly life, he would renounce wealth, he would renounce kingship, he would leave home, and practicing a fully committed path, awaken as a fully realized Buddha for the benefit of all beings. The king, Suddhodana, was overjoyed and troubled. He'd long wanted an heir, a son who'd not just be his equal, but would surpass him and become emperor of the world, fulfilled his greatest dreams. So he was determined to keep all knowledge of impermanence from his child. Near the end of the queen's pregnancy, she set out for the home of her parents to give birth there, which was the tradition of the time. And on the way, she stopped at the Lumbini Gardens, surrounded by a great retinue of attendants. And while standing beneath an ancient sala tree, and a rain of blossoms fell upon her, holding on to one limb of the tree, standing, she gave birth. Legend holds that at that moment the air filled with the scent of incense and beautiful voices began to sing in a language of delight, heavenly voices, angelic voices, voices of the devas, a higher realm, had penetrated or intertwined, entangled with this realm, this ordinary realm at that moment. Emerging painlessly from his mother's right side, the baby Buddha, it said, took 7 steps, lotus flowers springing up from under his feet. Devas became beings of higher realms, became visible and descended from these higher realms, pouring heavenly ambrosia upon him, washing away any of birth defilements. Raising one hand towards the heavens and pointing the other down toward the earth, he sounded the lion's roar of all Buddhas, proclaiming, above the heavens, below the heavens, I alone, the honored one. In this very life, I shall be a Buddha. All suffering beings experience freedom, joy, and peace. Prisoners, captives, and exiles found release. Hell's fires ceased to burn. Hungry ghosts were satisfied. Animals were freed of fear. Warring spirits stopped battling one another. And happiness suffused, momentarily suffused all beings. However, no one was happier than the Queen Maya, seeing her long-awaited child at last, unless it was the newborn Buddha himself. Already looked upon each deva, each person, each animal, tree, flower, and stone with the eye of a mother who regards her beloved only child. So that's the essence of the legend of the birth of the Buddha. Let's take a look at it from the perspective of actual practice. The language of myth here is used to point beyond the literal. That's the essence of mythic language, we might say. I mean, the birth of any child is totally ordinary and at the same time is totally a miracle. How do 2 cells become a living person? How do gastrula and blastula become a being with specific talents, interests, features, personality? Where does a child come from? The birth of any one child is a mystery that affects us all, whether we consciously know it or not. Myth gives imaginative space to the uncanny, ordinary reality we are actually living every day. Still, in reality, babies don't talk. The baby Buddha's profound utterance can't be taken literally. Fundamentalism's reductive literalization of myth takes us down a rigid road. So far, no Buddhist sects have sprung up arguing over what the baby Buddha said or how many steps he took. Let's hope they never do. Yet we humans have been sadly all too willing to cling to beloved untruths and make mountains, not even of molehills, but of anthills. Zen begins with the sense that our current story might at least be, if not untrue, then certainly inadequate. Not really up to the facts of our own existence, to be blunt. Roshi Kapleau used to say that to practice Zen, there's not much we need to believe, except that 27 or so 100 years ago, the Buddha was neither a fool nor a liar, when upon his great enlightenment he spontaneously exclaimed. Spontaneously really means he himself was astonished. It wasn't like he figured it out. It was like he was astonished to discover that wonder of wonders, all beings are Buddhas, fully endowed right now with all wisdom and all virtue. Only their self-centered, delusive thinking that constant I, me, mine, which you can't push away, you can't force away. It has to be seen through. Only that prevents them from realizing this. So we don't need to literally believe that the Buddha spoke as a newborn, or that flowers rained down from the skies, or that he took 7 steps. However, is there truth in these mythic elements nonetheless? Definitely. And while Zen practice offers us the opportunity to mature beyond beliefs and realize, to whatever extent we're currently capable or able, original mind or unconditioned mind for ourselves, just as we are, not one day in the future when we're more perfect or more wonderful or more mature or whatever it is, or wiser or more compassionate. Right now, to realize original nature. The way of the bodhisattva, the wisdom being or the growing up being, we must still begin with belief, with some basic faith that there is something beyond, yet not separate from, the senses and intellect that can be realized, can be awakened to, can be realized, not necessarily intellectualized or understood, but realized and lived. And with that belief as well, and with the belief or understanding as well, that it will take work, paradoxically, to wake to it. The paradox is this is our own nature. We don't gain anything from realization or intimacy or enlightenment, whatever word you want to use. If it's our own nature, then the paradox is how come, or the question is about this paradox, how come it takes so much work to awake to it, even to get a glimpse of it? This is the great paradox that drove young Dogen, Zen Master Dogen, so deep into his practice. How come? If this is my original nature right now, that sees with the eyes, sees colors, hears sounds with the ears, feels with the body, if this is my own nature right now, why? Why don't I know it? And why did all the sages of the past have to sweat blood and tears to realize it themselves, if it's our own nature? Great paradox. However, while this sounds simple on paper or in words, all I have to do is work at it and wake to my original nature, wonder of wonders, we're all Buddhas. It doesn't come easily. It just doesn't. Fairy tales remind us that we may have to eat 7 iron loaves and wear out 7 pairs of iron shoes before we arrive at fulfillment. And this is not simply advice for children and fairy tales. Persistence is the essence of the hero and heroine's journey, of success in any endeavor, really, or in any realm. Persistence, 9/10 of genius, is persistence. Persistence in Zen practice embodies our faith that the Buddha wasn't a fool or a liar when he spoke of our birthright, original, unconditioned mind, our own birthright, yours and mine, whether we know it or not, whether we work at it, its realization or not. This is our birthright. He wasn't talking about something unique to Buddhists either. He was telling us that there is something worth realizing at the core of this very life. And while we may each have caught glimpses of it now and then in childhood or as adults, formal practice can make its more complete realization that much more possible. The legendary words of the baby Buddha, above the heavens, below the heavens, I alone, the honored one, can be badly misunderstood. They do not present egotism or narcissism, but its opposite, humility and selflessness. A note to the classic Zen text Blue Cliff Record, or Pian Lu in Chinese, Hekigen Roku in Japanese, says, an ancient said, a sage has no self, but there is nothing that is not his or her self. A sage has no self, but there is nothing that is not his or her self. Dogen says, when we push the self forward to become one with the 10,000 things, this is called delusion. When the 10,000 things step in and realize themselves as the self, this is intimacy, another word for enlightenment. Though the baby Buddha's legendary word, or through the baby Buddha's legendary words, original enlightenment is given voice. I alone, the honored one, doesn't mean just me, the honored one. It means no other, no self, no other, alone. Alone but not lonely. This vast emptiness, nothing to be called holy. While legend asserts that the Buddha knew this truth at birth, history reminds us that the baby still had to grow up and become Prince Siddhartha Gautama, who, heartsick over his own first-hand experience of old age, sickness, and death, had to struggle to realize finally, fully, and consciously what he'd already understood at birth, what every baby understands at birth. We've just been spending time with a newborn, our grandson. It's amazing how totally present a baby is. Fully there. In a way, you just get high being around a baby. There's no self-centeredness there blocking a thing. Everything steps in, is alive, is fascinating to them. And there's a joy that emanates from them. But of course, they have to grow up. We all did. And lose that. Conditions, schools, parental additions, all the things that give us the foundation to struggle beyond ourselves in the end to realize that original nature we had when we were born. That kind of joyous. Blake has a very tiny poem in Songs of Innocence. I am but 2 days, what does it go? Let's see, I am but 2 days old. What shall I call thee? Joy is my name. Sweet joy befall thee. In other words, the 2-day-old baby is just joy itself. And he adds, Blake was not beyond irony. He was sharp. Sweet joy befall thee. Sweet joy, pretty joy, but 2 days old. I happy am. Sweet joy befall thee. We all have to go through that. And find our way back is the point of practice. So, there's a Jewish legend that says every child in the womb already knows all truth, all wisdom. But at birth, an angel touches the child's upper lip with its finger, leaving that indentation beneath the nose, and the child forgets it all. Our life's work, then, is the work of overcoming that angelic touch and remembering what we once already fully knew, except we had no consciousness of it. We were it so completely, we weren't conscious of it at all. This is the work of making innate wisdom conscious and mature. If you remember Ikkyu, 1300s or so, great iconoclast, Ikkyu's wonderful statement summing this up. When I tried to remember, I always forgot. But once I forgot, I never forget. When I tried to remember all those wonderful moments where I felt one with things, where I felt at home on this earth, whereas at peace and filled with love and presence, I kept losing them. I kept trying to remember them. I kept recall them. I kept trying to guide my life by them. But once I forgot myself completely, forgot my self-centeredness completely, then I never forget, because that's what's there. This is such an interesting take in a nutshell of what Zen practice is really all about. It's right recollection in classical Buddhism in a nutshell. With the self-preoccupied self forgotten, what we've been seeking is already here. we don't have to add a thing. With self-centeredness dropped away, we are simply home. And it is a great relief. The last lines of The Lord of the Rings touch us deeply because they remind us of something we all already know. It's universal. Sam returns from seeing Frodo and Gandalf off at the Grey Havens. And this is what Tolkien writes. And he went on, and there was a yellow light and a fire within. And the evening meal was ready, and he was expected. And Rose drew him in and set him in his chair and put little Eleanor upon his lap. He drew a breath. "Well, I'm back," he said. I'm back. The point of the journey is not to end up in some esoteric place, but to come fully home. How do we do it? Zen practice says by attending to counting this breath from 1 to 10, by becoming fully aware of this breath, by sitting completely absorbed in the koan, in the question, the inquiry, or in thinking, not thinking. In short, by practicing, is how the self is forgotten. And as we do, the world of 10,000 unique, specific, and individual things, this cup, this mat, this caw of the crow, this flower, this tree, step in. And it is if we are fully home and born anew. This is how a Buddha is born. And it is an ordinary and extraordinary miracle. Yet the Buddha's historic legendary birth is itself a mystery, and presenting it as uniquely miraculous as the legend does, offers its own kind of legitimate truth. Where does a person who's the first to do what's never been done, someone whose efforts ultimately influence millions of lives for the good, come from? Where does such a person come from? Buddhist tradition says the birth of the child, Siddhartha Gautama, was the first time in our world cycle that original realization found its voice. Buddhist tradition holds that there were past Buddhas on this earth before him, and there will be future Buddhas on this earth after him. The baby Buddha, after proclaiming his selfless truth above the heavens, below the heavens, I alone, the honored one, lapsed back into infantile smiles, tears, gurgles, laughs, coos. When grown up as Prince Siddhartha, after seeing signs of impermanence, he gave up his throne and set off into the wilderness of forests and mountains to fulfill his deeper calling. In his complete enlightenment, all potential powers of the mind for wisdom and compassion were, tradition holds, opened and fulfilled. Amazingly, he did this pretty much on his own. Though he had several teachers at the start, he came to feel they just didn't go far enough and moved rather quickly on. His ongoing effort arose from a determination, an unfathomable determination to benefit all beings. It arose out of the conviction that there was something more, beyond what we see and sense, and yet not separate from it. It arose out of dedication to the reality, not just the possibility, but the reality of awakening. And it arose out of dismay and disillusionment, and out of grievous pain caused by past errors and failures. And it arose out of lifetimes of previous effort as dramatized in the Buddhist Jataka tales, past life tales of the Buddha, sometimes showing tremendous compassion and wisdom and triumph over self-centeredness, sometimes showing his struggles to get out of that, sometimes even revealing his failures. It's a very humble tradition in many ways. In any case, knowing from our own practice how hard it is to catch even a glimpse of realization. Prince Siddhartha's ability to accomplish the path alone is not simply extraordinary, but miraculous. His birth is cause for celebration. A tremendous amount of hard work was still needed before what was already in place for him was finally fully mature. Yet the essence was there, fully established, right at birth, with above the heavens, below the heavens. This above the heavens, below the heavens is not simply some Eastern thing. It is not simply some Buddhist thing. The 17th century English Christian theologian and mystic Thomas Traherne, speaking of his own childhood in his Centuries of Meditation, which was a manuscript that was found in the stall of an English bookseller some 300 years after Traherne's death. It was never known in his lifetime. In the 3rd century, in his collection of meditations, he called them the Centuries of Meditation. This is what he wrote. To me, it is one of the most stirring things I've ever seen put into words. He wrote, speaking of his childhood when he was a little boy, "The corn was orient and immortal wheat, which never should be reaped, nor was ever sown. I thought it had stood from everlasting to everlasting. The dust and stones of the street were precious as gold. The gates were at first the end of the world. The green trees, when I saw them first through one of the gates, transported and ravished me. Their sweetness and unusual beauty made my heart to leap, and almost mad with ecstasy. They were such strange and wonderful things. The men, oh, what venerable and reverend creatures did the aged seem, immortal cherubim, and young men glittering and sparkling angels, and maids, strange seraphic pieces of life and beauty. Boys and girls tumbling in the street and playing were moving jewels. I knew not that they were born or should die, but all things abided eternally as they were in their proper places. Eternity was manifest in the light of the day, and something infinite behind everything appeared, which talked with my expectation and moved my desire. The city seemed to stand in Eden, or to be built in heaven. The streets were mine. The temple was mine. The people were mine. Their clothes and gold and silver were mine, as much as their sparkling eyes, fair skins, and ruddy faces. The skies were mine, and so were the sun and moon and stars, and all the world was mine, and I the only spectator and enjoyer of it. I knew no churlish properties, nor bounds, nor divisions, but all properties and divisions were mine, all treasures and the possessors of them. So that with much ado I was corrupted and made to learn the dirty devices of this world, which now I unlearn and become, as it were, a little child again. Above the heavens, below the heavens, I alone, the honored one." This is our own original mind. When I tried to remember, I always forgot. But once I forgot, I never forget. But the historic Buddha's birth led to a practice by which we ourselves can confirm the reality of Traherne's stunning words. So each year, on or around April 8th, we take a little time out of our busy schedules to honor the birth of the Buddha, Shakyamuni. We're grateful for the possibilities his efforts opened to us. But before we become lost in sentimentality, there's this from Master Yunmen, Unmon in Japanese. Yunmen related the legend, and this is from John Wu, The Golden Age of Zen, the book. Yunmen related the legend that the Buddha, immediately after his birth, with one hand pointing to heaven and the other pointing to earth, walked around in 7 steps, looked at the 4 quarters, and declared, "Above heaven and below heaven, I alone am the honored one." After relating the story, Yunmen said, "If I were a witness to this scene, I would have knocked him to death at a single stroke and given his flesh to dogs for food. This would have been some contribution to the peace and harmony of the world. Roshi Kapleau loved that quote, which reminds us that we don't need fantastic legends and images, wonderful as they are, for they too can bind us and trip us up. When we throw them away, we find that the Buddha was simply a person who, deeply troubled by impermanence and deeply aspiring to be of benefit to all, put his life on the line to realize truth and open a path to it for others to follow. Yunmen, 1,500 years after the Buddha and 1,000 years before us, wanted us to be like the Buddha and actually awake, not remain trapped by lovely signs and wonders. While myth suggests vast realities, the word myth itself has been popularly degraded to mean untruth, perhaps due to a half-baked understanding that myth is not literal. Of course it's not, but that doesn't mean it's false. That would be a failure to understand that, regarded properly, myth leads us to the very door that Buddhist practice flings wide open, even as it leads or speaks back from the other side of that open door, or that gateless gate. All our Dharma ancestors, men and women who, troubled by impermanence and injustice, had faith that there was something more, encourage us to keep going, to persevere. The way extends so endlessly that even Shakyamuni, the fully realized Buddha himself, is, according to Buddhist tradition, only halfway there. Yasutani Roshi presents the core of this rather dramatically and quite literally in the Three Pillars of Zen, stating that we fancy ourselves, we human beings, to be the crown of creation, yet from a Buddhist point of view, we're only really halfway between an amoeba and a fully awakened Buddha. These are sobering words, of course. Anyone who thinks they've gotten it or has gone far enough might want to consider or reconsider what Yasutani Roshi said. We're halfway between an amoeba and a fully realized Buddha. Yunmen's response about knocking him to death with a stroke and feeding his flesh to the dogs was his unique way of honoring the Buddha, his way of making sure that we would honor the Buddha by doing what he did, by following his advice, by putting our effort and our perseverance and our faith into actual ongoing practice realization, not remaining merely with comforting belief. His words are an antidote to fundamentalism. Yet to imitate Yunmen's iconoclastic perspective is going to lead us astray as well. Using harsh words, shouts and blows, because Yunmen and others did it, is not Zen. It's only imitative, wild fox slobber, a kind of self-indulgent, a kind of poison. In our Buddhist birth ceremony, which takes place, today is the 12th, the traditional date of the Buddha's actual birth in Mahayana tradition is April 8th, but ceremonies can be either before or after, depending on how it falls in our calendar. We honor the Buddha tenderly and traditionally. We don't knock him to death and feed his flesh to the dogs. We honor him tenderly and traditionally, with respect for the mythic import of his legend. It need not be literal, but its mythic import is profound. It speaks to each one of us and our own potential and our own aspiration and our own faltering efforts. So we'll raise a spoon of sweet tea and pour it over our baby Buddha, anointing and cleansing him just like the birth-attending gods, the Shining Devas, did 2,500 or so years ago. And it has another purpose as well, of course. In washing the baby Buddha free of grime, We wash our own minds free of greed, anger, self-centeredness, ignorance. This, too, is how a Buddha actually gets born. In 2016, Rose and I and Signana Graf Roshi and her combined sanghas, the Vermont Zen Center, Casa Zen Costa Rica, and Taigen Henderson Roshi of the Toronto Zen Center, went on a pilgrimage to Japan. And while we were there, we visited Ensuji, which was the training poet of the wonderful poet, Zen priest, and really subtle, interestingly subtle human being, Ryokan, one of the most beloved figures in Japanese Buddhism. His dates are 1758 to 1831, rather. So he trained at Ensuji, and that's where we were. And there we found a baby Buddha with one hand raised to the heavens and one hand down to the earth, sitting on the altar. It was just there all the time. And though in Japan, we saw Buddhas in Japan there that were literally as big as houses, and they were gilded and glorious. And at Ryokan's place, Ensuji, the baby Buddha was about the same size as the little wooden one on our altar here. And it was even less impressive. It was cast in dull black metal. This one is hand carved out of wood. It was very humble, and it was really touching to see it. It stands out to me as one of the highlights of our pilgrimage, much more worth keeping in mind than many of those huge, glorious Buddhas we saw. Many of those Buddhas were actually built by those in power or warlords seeking to gain control, and they were glamorous. But that little 8-inch or so dull black metal Buddha, standing Buddha above the heavens, below the heavens, had so much depth to it. I don't know, that's the one that really touched me. Practicing realization. This is the essence of how a Buddha is born. The story of the Buddha's birth might be based on history or not. Regardless, it remains a solid metaphor for our own potential. This very count of breath, this very breath, our awareness of it, this very koan, this mu or other koan, this inquiry into who's hearing, this can be our own entrance into the Lumbini Gardens, which is the reality of this whole green and living planet. This is the Lumbini Gardens, and this is where and how a Buddha is born. To unpack the mythic language a bit further, we might say that whenever self-centered, delusive thinking falls away and a person awakes, even for an instant, to the selfless reality of above the heavens, below the heavens, a Buddha is born. The sweet little figures of the baby Buddha, then, are not simply sentimental mementos capable of rousing tender devotion. They also offer a highly concentrated image of actual practice realization with awakening. A Buddha is born. In addition to pointing back into legend and history, they simultaneously touch base with the full potential of each of us in this very moment. Baby Buddhas, rejoice, awake.